A bunch of you have been asking me to cover the metal virus from the Sonic the Hedgehog IDW comics, and while I understood the gist of what happened, I finally viewed the complete saga on the Adrenaline Dubs YouTube channel, and the series is fantastic, although I will admit that the voice acting definitely helped with that. Now, as the name suggests, the metal virus was a virus that was created by Dr. Eggman, and it would turn any living life form into a robot. So that means both plants, animals, and even people were at risk. But let me go ahead and start from the beginning so that you'll understand how this came to be in the first place. Now, the Metal Virus series starts with Sonic resting on the water, taking a much needed break because he and his group just recently defeated Neo Metal Sonic. And not to spoil for the people who may not have seen the fight, but Metal Sonic was giving Sonic and Knuckles crazy work until Shadow showed up here. But as to be expected in the Sonic universe, Sonic doesn't get to enjoy this vacation for very long because we see that Tails shows up and shows him an invitation from the world's best doctor, which of course is actually just Eggman. But at this point in the series, Sonic thinks that Eggman is still Mr. Tinker, which is the persona Eggman took on after Sonic defeated him in the previous fight, causing Eggman to lose his memory. But for now, Sonic and Tails have no idea who sent this message, and in order to find out, they decide to go over to the Windmill Village to see who this is. After that, we switch over to Dr. Eggman's perspective, and we see him with his new fanboy, Starline. And in the scene, we get to see Eggman conducting experiments with the metal virus. We see that the first thing he uses the virus on is this flower, and it turns to metal almost instantly, showing just how potent the virus can be. But that isn't enough for Eggman. He also wants to see how the virus will affect animals, and we see that just like with the flower, the animals fall victim to the virus very quickly as well. But the more troubling fact is that the virus can be transmuted simply by touching someone. And that makes this virus especially dangerous because in most virus outbreaks, the infection is spread through blood, through bites, or open wounds. But in this situation, a simple tap can ruin somebody's life. Two other dangerous things that I noticed about the virus is that Eggman has some control over the creatures that are infected, and the virus can spread from plant to animal, meaning that even walking on the grass could be dangerous if this virus gets out of hand. Now, while all this is happening, we see that Sonic and Tails have made it to the village and run into two characters called Rough and Tumble. And while they're both kind of dumb, they do have Eggman's tech on them, which makes them somewhat formidable. But with Sonic and Tails working together, the two of them take them out pretty easily. But before they can get any information out of them, Starline teleports them back to Eggman's base. But seeing that something is obviously wrong here, Sonic sets off to find Silver to see if he can actually help him figure this out. And this chapter ends with Starline asking Eggman if he can have a shot at killing Sonic. Now in the next issue, we see that Sonic has met up with Silver and they are going to go speak with one of his mysterious informants. But before they can get to him, they run into Metal Sonic and have a quick bout, only to learn that Silver's informant is actually working with Metal and is of course Starline. And as we expected, Starline does try to kill Sonic and Silver, but he failed, not even being able to put a scratch on the two of them because of Silver's ability. But this does actually go to show us that Starline is dangerous in its own right, but this isn't the most important part of the chapter. The vital information here is that Eggman has found out a way to spread the metal virus, basically by infecting key locations and then allowing the infected Mobians to infect other people, which is actually a really smart plan. We also see that he's going to use Rough and Tumble as test experiments, and the two of them are too dumb to realize that they're in big trouble here. Next, we see Amy and Sonic go to find one of Eggman's abandoned bases, but Eggman has some kind of sensor set up, so he was able to detect them and send Rough and Tumble to deal with them. And they make a pretty dramatic entry. But once they use Eggman's new tech, thinking that it will give them the edge versus Sonic and Amy, it actually releases the metal virus onto them, turning them into robots. And while Amy Rose is relatively safe here because she's able to attack them with her hammer, Sonic is attacking them with his body as per usual, unaware of the fact that the virus spreads by contact. As we see in this panel here, he attacks a bunch of times in quick succession. And we see that the effect of the virus is almost immediate on Sonic as well. And seeing that he doesn't really have any other option, Sonic knocks Rough and Tumble into a pit, buying himself some time to figure out what's going on with the metal spreading over his body. Now, luckily, in the next issue, we see that Sonic is able to slow down the effect of the metal virus by running at high speeds, which is obviously right up his alley. But it seems like if he slows down for too long, the effect will ramp up again. Meanwhile, over with Dr. Eggman, we see that he's been given the Chaos Emeralds as a gift from Starline, and he's also making a huge batch of the metal virus so that he can start spitting it out on innocent Mobians. And the ones that are not hit by the virus directly will begin to be chased down by their infected neighbors. And in the final scene here, we see that even the flickies are caught in the infection, which is bad because they can fly and make it over to the big cities relatively quickly, infecting even more people. I think the saddest part about this issue is that the village that Eggman attacked is called Windmill Village, and after he lost the battle against the Resistance and got amnesia, the village took him in and treated him like family. And even though he's aware of this, he still unleashed the virus on them first, serving as a reminder that even though Eggman is kind of goofy at times, he's definitely a true villain at heart. Next, we cut over to the city and we see the perspective of the chaotic crew, and while at first it seems like everything is okay, we suddenly then see an infected burst through the door, forcing them to run outside, where we see the whole city is under attack, and Eggman's spaceship is releasing more and more of the virus. Thankfully, Vector is able to radio for help, and we see that Sonic makes it on the scene, which is good considering that he's the only person that can actually attack them at the moment, at least physically. And while Vector and his crew do their best to get the unaffected people to safety, it is impossible to save them all, which of course angers Charmy. And we see this come to a head after Vector gets a bunch of citizens to the escape shuttle, but Charmy feels like they haven't done enough, so he flies back to check on the people who became infected, only to be caught by surprise. Now back over by the Windmill Village, we see that Sonic has arrived on the scene to help the Mobians here, and this is also when Cream and her mother Vanilla are introduced into the series. And we see that Vanilla is trying to barricade the house, even though Cream wants to go fight. And with Cream only been about 6 years old here, I don't really think she fully understands the danger that they're in. But she's also a brave kid as well, so I'm guessing that probably plays a little bit of a factor as well. And a point is put on this when we cut back over to Eggman and we learn that the infected Mobians are not listening to his command, which means that there's a village full of zombies that are just doing whatever they want to do. And apparently this virus is acting like how the vid-19 works, meaning that as it spreads from person to person, it starts to mutate and create newer and stronger strains. And some of them are mutating in a way that makes them uncontrollable, meaning that Eggman will have no say over what they do. And to make matters worse, we see Jamari pop up next, and he wants to attack Sonic because Sonic technically is infected, and he is the highest level threat on the field at the moment. And seeing that there's no convincing him, Sonic runs off to burn away some of the infection, leaving G to deal with the infected villagers. And honestly, if it wasn't for Cream, he would have blown them all up. But Cream is able to remind G that he was once a robot that was forced to fight against his will, and now the villagers are in the same boat. So instead of killing them all, he instead just tries to slow them down and use non-lethal force. Unfortunately though, while this is all happening, Vanilla screams, and we see that the infected have made it into the house. But before they can attack her, we see that Cheese and Chocolate actually sacrifice themselves to save the family. And this actually made me kind of sad because these little dudes didn't even hesitate to protect the family. In the next issue, we see that Sonic is heading over to Sunset City, and Shadow is supposed to be arriving on the scene soon as well, because as we can see here, the city is completely overrun with infected. And while I am leaving out some of the smaller details while I talk about this series, I have to mention Omega because he is unironically the funniest character in this comic, and Techno did a fantastic job with the voice acting. But this part right here where Sonic is trying to save all the Mobians trapped in the building, and Omega comes out of nowhere and just starts emptying his whole clip into these poor Mobians. And Sonic is trying to explain to Omega that these are Mobians and they should be handled with care. They're not like your typical badnets. And then we see Omega literally pick up one of the Mobians by their neck. And he says, "Is this a robot?" And Sonic has to answer like, "Yeah, kinda." Then Omega asks, "Was it created by Eggman?" And technically, yes. And we all know that Omega's primary function is to destroy all of Eggman's creations. So he slams this poor Mobian to a wall, screaming that he needs to destroy all of Eggman's robots. And at one point, Sonic even asks him to slow down the horde, and he says he'll create a wall of corpses to keep them at bay, which is the craziest line in the series. Now, after fighting the creatures back for a bit longer, we see that Shadow finally arrives on the scene with a truck, and he is pissed. And in a way, I can understand why. Shadow feels like Sonic should have allowed him to kill Eggman in Windmill Village instead of giving him a chance to live a new life, because then none of this would have happened. But on the other side, I agree with Sonic because I feel like most people should be given a chance at redemption, especially in this case where Eggman literally lost all of his memories. But who do you think is right here? Do you think that Shadow should have been allowed to put Eggman down, or do you think Sonic was right to give Eggman a chance at a new life? Now in the next scene, we see that Shadow jumps into the crowd of infected and he starts to beat them down, not heeding Sonic's advice at all. But in his defense, Shadow is supposed to be immune to all type of viruses, but what I think he misunderstood was that illnesses or viruses have to actually be natural, and the metal virus is man-made. So after fighting for just a short time, Shadow is covered in the virus, and since he is so arrogant, he refuses to run the infection off, which honestly is Shadow's biggest weakness. Because while Shadow is extremely strong, he's always going to be his biggest enemy. And because of that hubris, we see that he is fully corrupted in a short time. And this is so dangerous because Shadow is likely on par with Sonic when it comes to like their overall fighting ability, when you count like all their pros and cons, although people have been arguing for years about which one is truly stronger. If I had to choose one, I would probably give the edge to Sonic because he is the protagonist of the series, so he's probably always going to come out on top. But in reality, Shadow is really powerful, and usually when you see him, he's not even using his full strength and he's still a threat. Now luckily for Sonic though, Shadow seems to have lost some of his combat knowledge when he became infected, so while he's still crazy strong, Sonic is the more skilled fighter now and is able to get away from him pretty easily. And with the help of Omega, they're also able to hold the horde back long enough for the survivors to get to safety, but not before my boy goes down, screaming victory or death. And right when it looked like Sonic might be cooked as well, Silver and Tails come to save the day, allowing him to escape and run off some of the infection, and also saving Omega, who is only ahead at this point. But luckily, Sonic is able to make it back to their new home base and meet up with the rest of the crew and the other survivors. Now, the most important thing that I want to point out here is that Tails ended up creating a device that is able to explain how Sonic's speed affects the virus, which may help Tails find a cure, showing just why Tails is the GOAT. And the final scene shows us Starline, who has finally figured out that Eggman is a nut job and really has no plan as to how to handle this outbreak. But he did manage to find information concerning the Deadly Six, who are a race of creatures that can control robots. And it's obvious that Starline is going to try to use them to control these zombots, and I'm sure this plan can't backfire at all, right? In the next issue, we see that Tails is back at his lab, and he goes out to get a sample of the metal virus, which allows him to almost get a cure, but Cheese and Chocolate cut the power to his lab and lead other infected over to him, destroying the lab and all the research. And while he does escape and make it to the shuttle with Tangle and Whisper, he then learns that the headquarters has fallen, which means that the virus definitely has the upper hand at the moment. And if all this wasn't bad enough, Starline also goes to meet the Deadly Six to set up an alliance, and just as I expected, they are planning to betray him. Next, we get a bit of a flashback where we get to see what actually happened to the Restoration Shuttle, or aka their headquarters. And as we see here, this shuttle was tightly packed with Mobians, and we also have Vector and Epsio here. And surprisingly, they were able to find and contain Charmy. And while a fight almost breaks out between Vector and G, Charm is able to play mediator, and all seems to be okay until we cut over to the other survivors and we see this one is all wrapped up. And as soon as I saw him, I knew it was up for these people. As soon as he takes off this cloak, it reveals that he is infected and he's pretty much at the end stage. And to make matters even worse, Charmy also manages to break out, and then the ship goes into pure chaos. The most notable characters we lost in the scene were Vanilla and also Vector, the latter of which we see get infected when he's trying to contain Charmy, and seeing that there's no hope for him, he willingly runs into the room with the other infected Mobians and holds the line while the others can escape. It reminded me a lot of that scene from the Train to Busan, which is an amazing movie if you haven't seen it, and if you like zombies. Next up, we see that Sonic runs into Dr. Eggman while he's trying to figure out a way to control the zombots, but then we learn something crucial. While Eggman is speaking to Starline, he reveals that the reason he hasn't given himself or Starline the vaccine for the metal virus is because he doesn't have one. Eggman's only plan is just to avoid the infected, which is obviously crazy, but it also reaffirms that even though Eggman is a genius, he is extremely reckless. And almost right on cue, Sonic pops up right in front of him, and after some brief conversation, Sonic starts to battle with Eggman and eventually tries to grab him, causing Eggman to fall to the ground and be surrounded by Zombob. But luckily for him, Starline is able to save him and get him back to the ship safely. But it seems like that fiasco has made Starline sure that he needs to go get the Deadly Six, so we see him meet with them once more so that he can actually use their abilities to control the Zombots. And even though they are planning to betray him, it seems like Starline is prepared. This conch that we see here apparently stuns the creature when it's blown, so at least Starline is thinking ahead and he isn't as naive as I thought he was. And while Sonic does look pretty tired at the end of this chapter, he is still able to run and is going to meet back up with Amy Rose. And next up, we see that Sonic meets back up with his crew and things are looking grim. They have no cure, more people are getting affected by the moment, and people are starting to crack under the pressure. And if all that wasn't bad enough, G informs Amy that the metal virus in Sonic is starting to adapt to his speed, which means that it's getting harder for Sonic to break the infection down, and he is likely running out of time. And speaking of people that are running out of time, we also see Tangle in this chapter and find out that she's been infected. But instead of being sad or giving up or blaming Sonic, she decided to make her last stand, holding back the horde and buying her team enough time to escape. And as to be expected, Whisper takes this very hard, crying her eyes out in Cream's lap, mourning the loss of her best friend. And this chapter ends with Starline teleporting the Deadly Six to Eggman's ship, and this is where things are going to really start to go off the rails. And in the next issue, we see this come to light almost immediately, with Eggman sending Metal Sonic to attack the Deadly Six, saying "destroy for daddy," which is a crazy line. And it was also a bad plan because we see that Metal Sonic is taken over and turned against him almost immediately. And in even worse news, Starline learns that the conch only works as long as he's blowing it, which obviously can't last long. And then he and Eggman are forced to teleport off the ship before the Deadly Six can tear them apart. And then we see the Deadly Six take the Chaos Emeralds so that they can use them to amplify their power and control even more robots. And with this development, Eggman is forced to join up with Sonic and his crew because the world is truly in danger at this point. And honestly, between Tails and Eggman, the two of them are likely smart enough to come up with some kind of solution, although Whisper almost cuts that idea short when she attempts to snipe Eggman. Luckily, Cream is there to talk her down, but honestly, I do feel pretty bad for her, and judging by how much damage Eggman has done, she very well may have the right idea here. Now, back over with Sonic and the crew, we see that Eggman betrays Starline, takes the Warp Topaz, and throws Starline through one of the portals, with the new plan being to split up and teleport to each member of the Deadly Six and take their Chaos Emeralds. And you know the crew is serious because they even called in the Babylon Rogues to help them out. Which was smart because the Deadly Six is moving to have the entire planet infected in a single day, so Sonic and the crew need all the help they can get and they need to move fast. And surprising, every team that went out to fight members of the Deadly Six were successful at grabbing their Chaos Emerald, with the only person to get infected being Cream. Leading to this scene where G throws the Chaos Emerald through the portal and decides to stay with Cream while she is transforming, never leaving her side. And I'll be honest, that kind of brought a tear to my eye because even though G is clearly a robot, he is one of the most human characters in this entire series. Now after that, there were only two more gems to get, those being the ones powering Eggman's ship and the emerald that Zeddy had in his chest. And with the help of Metal Sonic and Silver, Sonic is able to get to the last emerald, and then we get this amazing scene where both Sonic and Silver go super, and they use a combination of Silver's power and the Warp Topaz to absorb the virus from the planet and send it to the sun, fully ensuring that the virus was destroyed. And while this is technically the end of the Metal Virus saga, in the next issue, we get to see that Eggman escapes, of course, and the rest of the crew ends up defeating the rest of the Deadly Six pretty easily. But more importantly, we get to see what happens to Sonic, since he does disappear at the end of the Metal Virus saga. And it looks like he actually appears in the Soul Empire, and this is the place that is run by Blaze the Cat, I believe. And when she finds him, it becomes clear that Sonic has lost his memory, but eventually she's able to use the power of the Soul Emeralds to restore them and send Sonic back to his dimension where he gears up for more shenanigans. All in all, I thought the Metal Virus was a very cool concept, even though I would have liked to see more from Shadow and Knuckles, but I kind of understand why the writers didn't want to give them too much screen time in this series. 3 powerhouses all fully functioning would have made this story go very differently. I also know that I left out a bunch of panels, so if you want to see or listen to the full comic, go check out Adrenaline Dub's YouTube channel or the IDW publishing website linked in the description. Check out this video next and let me know if you guys want me to actually do a stream where I react to the full thing with you guys. But with that being said, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time with another one. Peace, peace.